Our confidence would waver. We would question ourselves. We might even question God if God had directed us and directed our path to be there in light of the circumstances. And your older brother is telling you how wrong you are to be there, how egotistical you are, and wicked your heart is. That would cause a lot of people to waver. You came down only to watch the battle, Elah told David. None of it was true, but David really didn't listen to these words. David had heard someone defy the God that he loved, and he was ready to question what was going to be done about this. I suppose even to begin with, David wasn't thinking necessarily that he was the one that would step up to do it. After all, he had 3 older brothers. King Saul was around, and there were a lot of people that seemed more likely choices to step up. People who were armed for battle. People had the regalia on to defend themselves. It seemed like there would have been any number of people who should step forward with this challenge, but no one was coming, and David was just angry that anybody would defy the God that he loved. When God speaks to you, there will always be another voice. When God tells you that you are the child that I love, that I have forgiven you of what sin is in your life, that I have mandated the steps that you are to follow, and I will walk with you, and I will be with you, and I will love you, and I will guard you, and I will guide you. When God tells us these truths, there are other voices that are always present. Have you noticed? You must decide what you will listen to and the appropriate course to follow. We have the choice within our own minds to either stand firmly on what we believe God has told us, in fact, what He does tell us in His Word that's indisputable, or we can allow the words of people around us to have impact on us and tell us that we should be something, or we shouldn't be something, or we should do something, or shouldn't do something. If David had have listened to his brother, he would have turned around and walked home, and this would be a very different story, and I wouldn't be preaching on it today. The shepherd now advises the king. What David said what David said at the army front was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." At first glance, again, this probably seems like an arrogant little kid in the presence of the king who has no greater sense than to say something like this to the king of Israel. But David had confidence. Arrogance it was not, no. David spoke from his relationship with his God. Our confidence is in God. And we have no fear when God has our back. David knew that God would walk with him and be with him and empower him to overcome this giant. And so he was listening to God, and he was not, even when the king was in front of him, he was not going to bow away from this conviction that he had within him, that was to send him forth and fight this enemy. There was more opposition. Saul now is speaking. You're not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth. Again, there will always be practical reasons why you can't face your giant, why you would not succeed if you tried. And it is particularly difficult for most of us when we hear from such an authority figure like this might have been for David, or was for David. David had been recently employed by the king to be there. He would play his harp when the king would have this troubled spirit that would come over him, and it would soothe him. He was also the armor bearer to King Saul. So he was around the palace with the king. The king had gotten to know him a little bit. By this time in chapter 17, he's going back and forth, as I talked last week, from shepherding to the palace, taking care of the king and his needs. So Saul knows a little bit about this man. And now there's probably some beginning of a relationship there. And he's hearing from a man that is the leader of all of Israel. You're not able to go against this giant. He's really too strong and he's too skilled and you're too young. He's been a warrior from his youth, and what have you been doing? You've been tending flocks. There are all kinds of reasons that we come face to face with day in and day out where we think we cannot move forward and be victorious over the enemies that are before us.